Okay, so for this next section, we're going to talk about the two screens either side and the rest of the pedestal. It's got its own little separate subsection because it's quite unique to the A300, and also was a real massive pioneering feature, in my opinion. I should always caveat that. I don't know everything. I don't pretend I do, but these are my opinions on some of the stuff with the A300. And I'm trying not to be biased towards it, but I can't overstate how much of a change this made to commercial aviation. I may be getting this misconstrued in terms of other aircraft may have done similar things at similar times, but I don't think so. So what do we have here? So, on a... Ooh, can you guess the phrase that I'm going to say next? On a more modern family of Airbus. There we go. You took the words right out of my mouth. The screens are like this, one here and one above it. So you have one up there, one down there. Here, there, to the left and to the right of the analog instruments. So I'm going to really definitely mix my terms up here, but it's fine as long as we're all on the same page about what we're talking about here. This is generally referred to the systems display page because, drumroll please, it displays systems. Whoa, crazy. But that is pretty crazy considering it's from the 80s. On the left we have is kind of called the left Ecam or the engine warning display. It's got a few different names, but we're going to stick with the left Ecam. Okay, I'll be wrong. There might be some A300 pilots out there going, "Oh, I'm so angry you called it left Ecam," but sorry, that's what we're going to stick with. As long as we're all on the same page about which screens we're talking about, the SD page and the left Ecam. So, I mean the screen on the left, and the SD page is the screen on the right. So, got that sorted, let's move on. What do they do? What function do they have? And why are they cool? So, on the right hand side, we have the door page. Now, this is just showing us which doors are open and closed. That doesn't seem that crazy. Kind of is, right? You have a screen with a graphical image of the plane. I'm going to give it to you. Not the best drawing of an A300 I've ever seen, considering it doesn't really look like an A300 at all. But it doesn't really matter, because it kind of shows you where all the doors are, and when you open them, they go a different colour. This was really radical stuff. This is taking information and displaying it in a pictorial fashion using cutting-edge technology. So a lot of these images are displayed by things called SGUs. They stand for Signal Generator Units. And on modern aircraft, or modern Airbus aircraft, again, a phrase we're going to hear often, they're called DMCs, Display Management Computers, I think. Anyway, we'll stick with SGU. So SGU is what they're called on the A300, and they basically make images. They make the images, and they're limited in some fashion, but pretty advanced in others. So how do we interact with these screens? Well, we interact with them with a panel called the ECP, the Ecam control panel. Before we take a look at that, let's talk about Ecam. What does it stand for? Well, it stands for, here we go, Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring System, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we'll stick with Ecam. But the premise of it is, when something goes wrong with the aeroplane, it's going to tell you, and it's going to tell you what to do to fix that. Now that is a really advanced feature for the time. So if we get some sort of damage or failure, or some sort of system goes wrong, it will tell us on the left Ecam. I think, as the plane, I'm being the plane right now, I think this has gone wrong, and this is how you fix it. And it tells you what button to press, and if you press the button, then it changes the color on the screen to show that you've done it, and then it moves through in a logical fashion to show you, well, now these things don't work, and this is what's going to affect your approach. So it makes failure management, or looking after the plane when it's a bit broken, much easier. And sorry to keep hating on Boeing, but I'm not a hater. I love Boeing aircraft as much as anyone else. But when you compare this to the 737 of the period, you didn't have any information that told you, oh, your engine failed, or oh, you've got a hydraulic blue system failure. It just tells you something is wrong with the hydraulic system. good luck looking at the overhead lights and working out what it is. This aircraft is already advanced enough to go, I know what it is, this is what it is, and this is what you need to do to fix it. So the old school way of doing it is you pull out a book, or you call it a checklist, or whatever you want to call it, called the Quick Reference Handbook, and it has all of the procedures in, and you would manually look around the aircraft and go, oh, I think this has gone wrong, and agree between you, yes, it's this, and then you would get the book out and you would action the items on there. This is just a digital display of that, but it also works out for itself what went wrong, and that's what's displayed on this left side. And you might be saying to yourself, well, why does it say memo? Well, it has a few functions, and one of them is the memo is telling you, what's going on with the plane. Parking brake is on, TCAS is in standby, IRS is on the line, Ecam flow selected, APU running. Well, that makes sense. It's telling you the parking brake is on, and it will also change the color of these dependent on what's going on. So the parking brake being on right now, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? If the parking brake is on when you're in flight, it doesn't make sense. So it goes yellow, like, it shouldn't be on. So same thing with when you start engines, it has different logic to dictate, well, now this shouldn't be green, it should be yellow, and then it also has logic of, now the engines have started, this isn't normal, so now I need to give them a warning, and the warning is called, normally referred to of, oh, I've got an Ecam, I have an Ecam, it shows me on the screen I have a problem, and it will work through that problem. Two types, we have one that are yellow, ones that are red, we have master warnings and master cautions, so you'll always know which one is which, because one makes a really loud ding 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 noise like a CRC, continuous repetitive chime, it doesn't stop, you have to cancel it, and the other one just goes bong once to get your attention. We're not going to do Ecams, we're not going to go through it. The system, the Ecam system is fully modelled. We have lots and lots of Ecams. Not all of them are in there because we're an on-the-line product, but every button that you can press in here will have an effect that will bring up the correct Ecam, and they are really good. The Ecams are really, we made sure, we spent a lot of time to make sure that they show the right stuff and that the information was taken from an actual real aircraft, not even documentation, because you can't get documentation on this, so it's taken from a real aircraft that flies on the line. So that's a little bit of an overview of the Ecam and what it's going to do for us. We're not going to get bogged down with doing one, that's more for a later date, or if you choose to do it, it doesn't really matter, but it's just kind of an overview of it. So now, let's change camera view and have a look at how we interact with this panel. Okay, here we are. I've popped out both of the displays, and you pop out the displays of the INI A300 by just clicking on them, and then if you click on them again, they go back into the display. So they're nicely popped out. And as I said, you can rescale them by dragging in the bottom right hand corner. But these are on the correct side, so I've kind of left a bit of a gap between the middle as we saw, and we can see the left Ecam, remember, don't crucify me if it's wrong, the right Ecam for the Ecam SD page. What are we looking at in front of us right now? This small panel, so here, this one, is called the Ecam control panel. We've mentioned it already. What does it do? Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, let's look at everything else we've got around here. Here it's just a display brightness for the displays, and these are the signal generator units that when you turn them off, they actually will blank the Ecam screens and the SD page screens because the signals can't be generated, it can't censor them, and it's a bit too advanced, so let's just stick with the basic functionality for today, but feel free to play around with them, they should work as advertised. So we have a column here, we have some blank switches here that look like I didn't order the full model of the A300, so I've got these little blank cheap switches. It's not the case, it's not what it's for, it's just the way they've made the panel. There's no sort of hidden upgrade options where you can get some more Ecam SD pages, it's just this is the way it looks on all of them. So we have engine, hydraulic, AC, DC, bleed, con, press, fuel, APU, flight control, door, wheel. Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Each of these link you to a new Ecam SD page to show you information about that system. We'll cycle through them in a moment. On the left side we have clear, status and RCL. RCL stands for recall, and status is its own topic in itself, but we will come to that in a moment. If you get an Ecam on the left screen and you want to clear it from view, so you've done the items that it says, or you're not interested in doing it, or you just want to clear it back, you press clear and it will clear it. There is obviously no Ecam on there at the moment, so it didn't do anything. So that's why the clear button had no effect there. Recall brings back the last Ecam that you had. Status shows you the status page, which will be used if you have sort of a failure of some kind or whatever. You can review what the status of the aeroplane is. It will tell you, do I have a downgraded approach capability? What effect is this going to have on the landing? Am I going to take longer to land? Am I going to take shorter to land? It tells you all on that page. This, if you're familiar with the A320, you're going to go, yeah, now I'm starting to see, and this is where when I started to get involved with the A300 program, you start to look, you go, yeah, now I'm really starting to see the Airbus heritage. And this is where it all started. This design of Ecam control panel, Ecam SD pages, status, clear, recall, you can go straight into an A350 and it is exactly the same. And I mean exactly the same, the basic core functionality of the systems and the way that it's structured, which is very impressive that they got it so right this time. And I think they just spent their time and thought, let's really think outside the box, because you're probably looking at it, yeah, so what, it tells me what position my door's in there, you know, and I can look at the flight controls and everything electronically. It's a pretty radical thing to go ahead and do and integrate as the way they did. So before I talk you to death, which I'm sure I already have, like I said, we're not going to do Ecams, we're not going to look at it. We are going to look at the SD pages reasonably in depth, because that's something that you're going to use every single time you fly the aeroplane. So let's start with engine. So we click on engine, you can see there's a bit of a delay bringing up these pages. That's correct, because there's a bit of a delay in all the systems in the A300, because they take a little bit of time to display the stuff. So we can see our oil PSI, oil temperature, quantity, nacelle temperature, vibrations, and fuel pressure. So most, not all, but most of this information is backed up in analog in those gauges that go between the screens. Remember that we were just looking at before. So you can see the oil PSI, you can see the oil temperature, you can see the oil quantity, you can't see the vibrations, and you can't see the fuel pressure, and you can't see the nacelle temperature. So there are some things that they only say, but they're not the most important pieces of information. The important ones are always backed up in analog in the A300. Something is triggering me, which is this squawk code, so I'm just going to set an actual just 2000 in there, because it looks very weird having 0000 set. Sidetrack done, let's keep going. So nacelle temperature is shown. If you move the engine mode switch, remember the switch on the overhead, to any of the start positions, it will change to a different setting that we'll look at later on. Moving on, hydraulic. It's an overview of the hydraulic systems. Remember, we were looking at the analog backup. This is the digital version of it, so blue, green, yellow in the same order. We can see the quantity of the hydraulic fluid in here, if it's inside the correct range. We could see how much pressure is in the system, nothing, obviously. We could see if the pumps are running, no they're not. If the electrical pump is producing pressure, no it's not, etc, etc. Let's not get too bogged down with it, let's just move on. AC and DC. So unlike some Airbus aircraft where the elect page is all on one, it's split into the AC and the DC. Remember from the first episode, alternating current, direct current, they split them into two different pages here. I believe the 330 does the same, because it's just a bit more of a complicated electrical system. What are we looking at? Well, we've already gone over the electrical system. Let's pick out some nice little features here. So we can see the IDG, stands for Integrated Drive Generator, I think. I'm going to get some of these wrong. I haven't got a script, by the way. We are just working through this from the top of my head, so I am going to make mistakes, but bear with me. It'll be worthwhile once we get to the end. Cool little neat feature we got. The temperature of the oil there is based on outside air temperature, and also a sort of warming effect that happens inside the IDG. So nice little feature there, and it also changes once the engines are running, because obviously it's hotter because it's getting hotter oil. It's all modelled. APU gen. Remember we were looking ages ago, feels like an eternity ago, I'm sure it's many hours ago now. We were looking at that analog thing where we could click between it and we could see APU gen load, all those little things on the overhead. Well, here we go. We can see the APU generator load is nearly full here because it's supplying the entire electrical system, and we can see the voltage and the hertz from that. And we can see it's varying ever so slightly because it's not giving us perfect voltage, which makes sense. External power, you can see that the voltage and the hertz are shown, even though it's not connected because it's ready to be connected. Going back to what we talked about with the electrical system, same thing, Gen 2, no hertz, no volts because it's not running. We have the buses. What's a bus? It's not a a thing that you fly around like an Airbus, or a thing that takes you to work, or a thing that you ride around on. It's like it's kind of a made-up thing so we can understand things. It's where a lot of electrical things are connected together in one place. So a lot of the things from the captain's side are connected to bus 1 because it's 1, most important as always. Bus 2 generally has all the things from the first officer's side attached up, and we're going to leave it there. We're not going to go too in depth. I hope that's enough for you. TR1, TR2, remember the transformer rectifiers, as we were saying, it turns the AC to DC, and we have the ESS bus, the essential bus, and the emergency bus. Again, things are connected there that are essential, the other ones are connected there that are even more essential, kind of, and we have the transformer rectifier and the inverter. What does an inverter do? We haven't talked about that yet. It is the opposite of a transformer rectifier. So a transformer rectifier turns AC electricity into DC, so logically an inverter turns stuff from DC into AC. Let's move on to the DC page. DC, a little bit weird looking page really, but we can see that we have norm bus, the essential bus. This is the DC essential bus, so there is a difference. And we can also see the transformer rectifier outputs here, here, and the essential transformer rectifier here. So you can see the system is all varying because it doesn't stay stable, because it's a real system that's modeled accurately. And we can see that the batteries are fully charged at this time, because remember, once we flick the switch on, and then you can see now they're drawing a little bit, so they kind of draw how much they need to all the time. So the amps are going in, the system's all moving around, it's a dynamic system. And these are the battery voltages here with the amperages below. Not much else to say. If you do an APU start, it's actually very cool to watch this page because you see a monster draw from the DC system because it assists the APU to start. Remember when we said we flick that switch, they all connect, which you can see they are all connected. That's because the APU switch is in the on position. Bleed, it's basically a digital representation of what we were looking at with that lower little bit of the diagram. So we've got the engine here, we've got the bleed pressure there, these are the packs. We can see that we've got 24 degrees Celsius, nice cool air. It's on low because it's not got a big demand at the moment. And this is the mixer unit and the RAM air, as we talked about. You can see the APU is connected up. We can switch all these valves and watch what it does by pressing the buttons on the overhead, but we're going to be here for hours if I keep going on like this. So it's just a digital representation of the systems, which again, like I say, that's actually pretty advanced, that I can look at my air bleed system on a screen. That was crazy stuff for this period. Conditioning, it's the same thing as we looked at before. So question time. Anyone ready? Remember this? Why is it showing me amber X's on the bulk cargo? Anyone? No? Okay. It's because that selector must be in bulk, remember? So the analog display is showing on the overhead, and that's why it blanks it off this screen. So you've seen this screen before when we were talking about the system, just so I could show that little feature. And you can see everything is set and stable. 24 degrees Celsius air coming in. It's 24 degrees Celsius in the cockpit because I've left them all in auto, which is great. Pressurization. This is a screen we've seen before when we looked at the pressurization system from the overhead. So we can see the PSI, the vertical speed, the cabin altitude, the outflow valve position, the safety valve, the vent overboard, remember, which we closed, and we manually took control of the system to close it up when we were doing our manual pressurization on the ground. Again, a digital display of what we have. Fuel, this is very useful. The fuel system, you can see how much fuel we've got. We can see that the inner tank is actually losing fuel because remember the APU is burning from that tank, and if we press all the different buttons it will show here cross feeds, everything else, and we can monitor the whole fuel system from this page. APU, it's just a more in-depth look at the APU. Nice little feature. I'm not going to do it now just because I don't want to ruin this beautiful camera position I've got set up. If you turn the APU bleed off, you'll actually watch the exhaust gas temperature, remember, EGT, how hot the small APU is running, will drop because it has less demand. So the lower the demand, the less it has to work, the cooler it will run. Kind of makes sense. But you can see it. If you turn it on, it goes up. If you turn it off, it goes down. All based on real world numbers. Flight control page, we can see all of the different flight controls, and very nicely we can see what systems rely on what. So you can see that the stab needs the green and the yellow, and then we can see other systems what they have and what they need, and if you fail them you can watch them go amber and then they won't move anymore, and etc, etc. So a really useful page if you're having a flight control problem or you're doing the flight control checks on the ground. Door, back to where we began. Wheel shows you temperature of the brakes and also the spoiler position. Now you're going to ask yourself now, do I have to constantly keep going through these? And when I'm taking off I don't want to see the door page. Correct. So there's an automatic logic for showing these pages, and the plane is smart enough to know they probably want to see this, they probably want to see that. So when you start the APU, it automatically displays the APU page because logically you're going to want to see it. When you take off, it shows you the engine page, blah 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 blah. There's multiple different scenarios, but the way that you know what's going on is, can you see it says door up here? It's in green and it's underlined. That means it's been displayed automatically. Now if I click on the door page, notice how it's white and underlined. That's called bookmarked. So it's like I selected it, and all these other pages will be white because I selected them. If I just deselect all the pages, it goes back to the door page because that's the one it wants to show. Sometimes this system can be a little bit annoying because you're in the middle of something and it goes, I'm going to display this. You're like, no, I don't want to see that, I want to go back. So then you have to click it back on. But you know, it's a very, very neat system. That pretty much covers the Ecam. I know we didn't do any Ecams, but that's not what this is for. But you've seen how sophisticated this system is and how it's influenced every Airbus, and to be perfectly honest, every modern transport category aircraft after this, because many modern Boeings, Embraers, you name it, they have systems where you can see an image of the plane and you can see what's going on with it, and you have different pages that you can select and you can view them all and whatnot. And as I understand, like I say, I might be wrong, that all started here in this plane with this system, and it's an excellent system, massively underrated for what it did for commercial aviation.